Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. So, I am Himanshu, PhD scholar from IIT Bombay. So, today is your week 9 tutorial for the basics of biology course. So, let's start with the question number 1. So, the heart pumps the fluid continuously through body. Option A is renal intestine, option B is lymphatic, option C is nephrons, and option D is blood vessels. Let's see what is the answer for this question. So the right answer for this is the option D, that is blood vessels. So what is this heart is? First let's see. This heart is a muscular four-chambered organ, and the two upper chamber we call the right atrium and the lower we call the left atrium, and the two lower chamber uh, upper chamber, this one is like right atrium and this one is the left atrium, and the two lower chamber, that is the bigger one, we call the ventricles. The right atrium and this right ventricle can together be called the right heart. This one is the right heart, and together the left atrium and the left ventricle we call the left heart. Both these heart chambers are divided by each other by a muscular wall. We called it as septum. And what is this? What are these blood vessels? The principal vessels of the blood are the arteries and veins. These are linked by a network of the small this capillary vessels. Veins carry this deoxygenated blood to the right side of heart, while these arteries carry the oxygenated blood to different part of the body away from the heart. So these arteries and veins, that is the blood vessels, these are the main component of this heart, and these heart pump the fluid continuously through the body through this blood vessels. Moving to the next question, the type of circulatory system seen in earthworm is option A is open circulatory system, option B is closed circulatory system, option C is no circulatory system, and option D is open and closed circulatory system. The right answer for this question is the closed circulatory system. We know that these is the like blood vascular system of this pheretima, that is pheretima is this earthworm. Here they have this closed circulatory system, that means the blood flows through the blood vessels. If blood don't flow through the blood vessel, we call it as the open circulatory system. But in case of earthworm, these blood vessels are present and blood flow through this blood vessels. So that's why we call it as there is a closed circulatory system. And there are two types of vessels. One is the collecting blood vessels and one is distributing blood vessels. They are the closed tube because they are a closed tube with a definite wall, and then they break into the capillaries to ramify into the different part of the body. And one of the interesting feature of this earth form is the arrangement of this blood vessel in the anterior 13 segments. That the first 13 segments, the arrangement of the blood vessels is different from the behind the 13 segments. And these 13 segments behind we call it the region of the intestine. So the blood vessels arrangement in the region of the intestine is different from the front 13 segments. So the blood vessels can be described under the two heads, the blood vessel and their arrangement behind the 13s, that is the intestinal regions, and their arrangement in the anterior 13 segments. So both are the different. So the basically the question they ask like which kind of the circulatory system present in the earth form. So they have this closed circulatory system because the blood flows through the blood vessels, not in the open spaces, in the closed tubes with the definite walls. So that's why they have this closed circulatory system. Moving to the next question, the deoxygenated blood in fishes is turned into oxygenated blood by the heart, option B is the gills, option C is the alveoli, and the option D is the blood vessels. So what is the right answer for this question? Gills. So in case of this fishes, they don't have this like heart system. They have this gills in fish that is under the Pisces. So we can see that this is the fish, and here gills are present, which help to convert the deoxygenated blood into the oxygenated blood. So this gaseous exchange is present through the gills only, and it is increased by the ventilation and the counter current flow of this blood. So how this happen, how this deoxygenated blood convert into the oxygenated blood? In fishes, this deoxygenated blood is pumped to the gills, and inside the gills filaments, they absorb the oxygen from the surrounding water. This water will come, water lamella, and they'll absorb this oxygen through a process called the counter current. Counter current flow of blood and water maintains a concentration gradient in which oxygen diffuses from water to blood over entire length of capillary. So this oxygenated blood is then distributed to the rest of the body, and it will provide the oxygen to the tissues and other organs. We know that mammals we have a lungs, but in case of these fishes they don't have this heart or alveoli in the blood vessels. So in they're completely this circulatory system relies on the gills only for their gaseous exchange. So the right answer is the gills. So this gills convert the deoxygenated blood into the oxygenated blood by the countercurrent exchange process. Moving to the next question, the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood in frog get mixed in. Option A is ventricle, option B is right atrium, option C is left atrium, and option D is none of the above. So let's see. Um, because in case of frog, they have this closed circulatory system. Closed circulatory system means they have a blood flows through the blood vessels in a closed tubes, which is covered with the wall. But in mammals, we know that we have a four-chambered heart, but in case of frog, they have this three-chambered heart. So amphibians have this three-chambered heart, in which they have this two atria, that is the left atrium and the right atrium. So they have this left and right atria. Here we can see that this is left and right atria, but they have this single ventricle. Like us, we have this two ventricles, left and right ventricles, but they have this only one ventricle. So this right atrium receive the deoxygenated blood from the body, and the left atrium receive the oxygenated blood from the lungs and skin. Both this atria, then left and right, pump their blood into the single ventricle, where this blood will mix before it get pumped to the body and leg through this post cable. So the oxygenated and the deoxygenated blood in frog get mixed in this ventricle only. Moving to the next question, they have the thin walls located closer to the surface of your body. The- and also walls that ensure blood flows in the right direction is option A is capillaries, option B is arteries, option C is veins, and option D is arterioles. And also, like walls ensure the blood flows in the right direction is, and thin walls, and it will be located closer to the surface of your body. Let's see what is the right answer for this question. So this is the structure of the veins. So veins are the blood vessels that carry the deoxygenated blood. Wait a second. So this is these veins. They carry the deoxygenated blood back to the heart, and they have this. The characteristic features in the question they asked is, first is the thin wall. And we know that the veins have very thinner walls than the artery because they carry under the low pressure. Also, this capillaries also have a thin walls, but in the second they mentioned like which is present, which is very closer to the surface of your body. So many veins, we know that even the in our hand also the blue color veins are visible, right? So these veins are visible under the skin, especially on the hand and legs we can see, right? Because of the property that they are located closer to the surface. So thin walls plus which is located closer to the surface of your body, and also they have the walls. Here we can see that this walls is present, and so that it can maintain the direction of blood flow, and it will prevent the backflow of the blood because of the presence of this wall in the right direction, so that the blood will flow in the right direction only, on the single direction only. So these veins have one way walls. Here we can see that they have this one way walls that prevent the blood from flowing backwards, so that the blood will not flow backwards, which ensure that this blood moves towards the heart. And these walls are important because veins work against the gravity, especially in the lungs, especially in the legs. Sorry, especially in the legs, these veins work against the gravity, right? Because here this leg is there, and they have to carry the deoxygenated blood. Like we know that the gravity force is always downwards, and this blood they have to pump it to the heart, to the lungs. So to the heart. So for that they have to like this is moving like backward direction, right? Against the gravity direction. Like this is moving against the gravity force. So for that maybe the backflow chances is there. For that this valve is there, which will maintain that no backflow will be there during this blood movements, and this blood moves towards the heart. The right answer is the vein. That veins have these thin walls, and it is located closer to the surface of your our body, and also they have the walls that ensures the blood flows in the right direction. Moving to the next question, the oxygen and nutrients are exchanged for carbon dioxide and waste state. Where the this both the things, that the oxygen and nutrients, they exchange for the carbon dioxide and the waste state. Option A is veins, option B is capillaries, option C is arteries, and option D is arterioles. Let's see the right answer, that the capillaries. These capillaries are the right answer. The capillaries are the smallest blood vessels which connect these arteries. Here we can see that this is the capillaries, and it connects the arteries and the veins, right? So the middle this structure is the capillaries. So they have the very smallest and the thinnest blood vessels connecting these arteries and veins. Their thin walls allow exchange of the oxygen, nutrients and other waste between the blood and the surrounding medium. Moving to the next question, the dilation of the atria and ventricles in a four-chambered heart is. Atria receive why the dilation of this atria and ventricle happens. Option A is because of the atria receive the blood and the ventricle pump the blood during the dilation. Option B is ventricle receive the blood and atria pump the blood. Option C is right atria receives the blood and the left ventricle pumps the blood. Option D is atria receive the blood and ventricles pump the blood. So let's see the right answer. So first, this four-chambered heart. Like what is this? We know that we human have this four-chambered heart, and because of that, we can efficiently pump the oxygen rich and oxygen like that efficiently pumps even the oxygen rich and oxygen poor blood to different part of the body. Like in a healthy person, it will efficiently pump the oxygen rate. It consists of the two atria, that is the right atrium and the left atrium. These two atrium receive the blood, one from the body, one from the lungs. And the two ventricles, the right ventricle and the left ventricle, they pump the blood. So how they will do this? The right atrium receive the deoxygenated blood from the blood through the superior and inferior vena cava. So there are two openings. One is superior that comes that is present upper part of the hearts in the right atrium, and one is through the through the which is present in the lower corner of this right atrium. We call this inferior vena cava. So these two opening, they receive the deoxygenated from the body. Superior will take the blood from the upper part of the body, that is head, hands, shoulders and all, and inferior vena cava will take the blood, receive the deoxygenated from the lower part of the body. So through this superior and inferior vena cava, this right atrium receive the deoxygenated blood from the body, and then this blood will pump into the right ventricle. So this right ventricle, after that, what it will do, it pump this deoxygenated blood to the lungs so that they'll oxygenate that blood by the pulmonary artery. So with the help of this pulmonary artery, it will go to the lungs for the oxygenation process. And then the left atrium, what it will do is, this left atrium receive the oxygenated blood from the lungs by the pulmonary veins. Here there is a contradictory that we know that veins usually carry the deoxygenated blood, but when it comes to the lungs, that means if pulmonary veins is there, it will always carry the oxygenated blood, and pulmonary artery, it will carry the deoxygenated blood. So this left atrium receives the oxygenated blood from the lungs with the help of this pulmonary veins. And the left ventricle, it pumps the oxygenated blood then to the entire body through the aorta. So here, when the dilation of this atria and ventricle in a fourth chamber heard, these atria receive the blood and the ventricle pump the blood. So this is the heart anatomy. Here we can see that this is the two openings, superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, which carry the deoxygenated blood, and it will receive this is the right atrium, and this pulmonary valve is there, and through this is the pulmonary artery which carry the deoxygenated blood, and this deoxygenated will go to the lungs, and the oxygenated blood will come through the pulmonary veins. Here, through the pulmonary veins, it will come to the left atrium. So this left atrium, through the pulmonary veins, this oxygenated blood will come, and then it will go to the left ventricle. This mitral valve is present. It will prevent the backflow of the blood. Here also the tricuspid, like which is made up of three cusps. So that's why we called it as tricuspid valve is present, which is also prevent the backflow of the blood. Moving to the next question, the normal heart rate for the AV node is option A is 75 to 100 beats per minute. Option B is 140 to 160 beats per minute. Option C is 110 to 130 beats per minute. And option D is 40 to 60 beats per minute. AV nodes, that is atrioventricular node. And we know that it is a very crucial part of the heart electrical system, and it will act as a gatekeeper also between the atria and ventricle, and it ensures the so that coordinated heartbeats is there. Normal heart rate. So let's see the answer for this. So here we can see that this is the SA node, and we also call it the natural pacemaker of the heart, and this is the AV nodes. AV node is also a part of this heart electrical conduction system, and it is also regulate the heart rate. It is normally responsible for relaying the electric impulses from the SA node. This SA node, this AV node, it will normally rely on the SA node. This SA node, we know that it is a natural pacemaker of the heart, and typically it fires at the 60 to 100 beats per minute. But when this SA node fails, then it will give signal to the AV nodes, and this AV node can take over as a backup pacemaker. It has a slower intrinsic firing rate. SA node, we know that 60 to 100 beats per minute is there, but it have a very slower intrinsic firing rate. This AV node is located here, like in the lower back section of this interarterial. This is the one atria, and here another atria, and this one is the interarterial septum. So it is located near this interarterial septum, near the opening of this coronary sinus. Here the opening of coronary sinus is there within the right atrium, and this one is the right atrium. So in the right atrium this AV node is present, and near the interatrial septum. Normal function of this AV node is, this AV node first it help in the electrical signal transmission. It receive the electric signal from the atria, that is upper heart chambers, and then it will conduct them to the ventricles. Also, AV node slightly delay the signal transmission, so that it will allow the fully contraction of this atria. Because if it will contract this atria, it will pump the blood into the ventricles before the ventricle contract. So that's why it will delay, introduce a very slightly delay in the signal transmission, which allow the atria to fully contract and empty the blood into the ventricle before this ventricle start contracting, right? And the third is like it is a like backup for the SA node. If SA node, that is, we know that it is a like natural pacemaker of the heart. If it fails, these act as a backup pacemaker. We know that although it has a very slow rate, 40 to 60 beat per minute, but still when it's not working, then it will take the like function of that SA node, right? So here we can also see that SA node is there. This is the SA node, natural pacemaker. It starts the contraction and sequential stimulation is there. And forced cardiac muscle depolarization is in one direction, that is from atria to ventricles. And AV nodes also called the one, this one, after that this bundle of this is there. From the AV node, this impulse travels through the right and the left bundle branches. These branches extend to the right and left side of the septum and bottom of the heart. Moving to the next question, the oxygen carrying protein in the blood is present in. Option A is white blood cells, option B is erythrocytes, option C is platelets, and option D is none of the above. Also, in the like previous question, I want to add that we know that natural pacemaker is SA node, but what if this AV node will not be there, like will not functional at all? That time it's not like heart will function properly. No, there will be disorders, that is cardiac arrhythmias will come, in which this heartbeat either they'll start beating very slowly and we call the bradycardia, and either they'll start beating very rapidly and we call it as tachycardia. So there is a role of this AV nodes. Like heart can't function without the AV node also, right? Because it's um, like it is also managing. We know that as a node is a pacemaker, still like it's also play a role in maintaining the like function. So this question, so let's see. So the right answer for this is the erythrocytes. What is this erythrocytes is? Erythrocytes are the red, like most abundant element which is present inside the blood is this erythrocytes. And it is a red in color and it is a biconcave in shape. They have this oxygen carrying compounds. These erythrocytes have the oxygen carrying compounds. We called it as hemoglobin that have a four globin proteins present, which bound to a pigment molecule called the heme, which also contain an atom of an ion of this iron. So this RBC, which is present in the erythrocyte, that is RBC, hemoglobin is responsible for this oxygen binding capacity, binding oxygen in the lungs, and it will transport to the tissue throughout the blood. So the white blood cells they don't have. They help in fighting the foreign materials. If any foreign materials or antigen will attack on the body, then this white blood cells help in fighting the against the pathogens. So it is a part of the immune system. This erythrocytes they have this hemoglobin which binds with the oxygen and help in the oxygen carrying proteins. So that's why erythrocyte is the right answer. Here we can see that this is the blood vessel. Inside the blood vessel, the red color biconcave shaped this RBC is present, and in this hemoglobin is present. This is the structure of hemoglobin, in which two alpha chain is there and two beta chain is there, and the heme group is there, and these four heme group they bind with the oxygen and carrying the oxygen. So this oxygen from the lungs will come, and here we can see that the four oxygen molecule will bind to the heme group of this hemoglobin, and then they will release this oxygen into the cells. Also, this oxygen binding affinity to this heme group of this hemoglobin will depend upon various factors like carbon dioxide, temperature, pH, that is H positive ion, DPG, which is a chemical, and the pH also. So, like here we can see that this is the normal curve, normal binding curve, that the oxygen binding is there and 50% oxygen will bind here at like approx 27 Hg pressure. But when there is a left shift is there, and like when this curve will shift to the left, when there is a low CO2 or a low temperature or low pH is there, low hydrogen ion is there and high pH is there, that time this curve will shift towards the left direction, and we called it as left shift. And here we can see that the 50% is now will bind to the somewhat to the like 10 to 20 minute, like 15 mmHg pressure. Here like more binding of oxygen, so more affinity of oxygen to the heme group. Like that also, like if the condition will reverse, if we increase the CO2 and increase the temperature or increase the hydrogen ion, either decrease the pH, that is acidic pH, then this curve will shift towards the right direction. And here now 50% will come near the 40 mmHg. That is, it will require higher pressure, oxygen partial pressure, to bind with this heme group. And one more interest, so in this way this curve shift, like these factors define that how this oxygen bind with the heme group. And also the one of the interesting property that it shows the sigmoidal curve. This curve is a sigmoidal. In the examination, people ask like the curve between the oxygen partial pressure and the heme binding, like what kind of curve it shows. So it shows the sigmoidal curve, and the interesting feature is they show the cooperative binding. Cooperative, what is this cooperative binding is when oxygen bind to the one hemoglobin molecule, we know that the remaining hemoglobin is unoccupied. So when the second will come, then it will again enhance the affinity for the third one. And when the third one will bind, then it will increase the efficiency for the fourth one. Like that. So they shows us cooperative binding. So this unoccupied heme sites, they increase the oxygen affinity. When one oxygen bind to the hemoglobin, the remaining unoccupied heme states now on the tetramer, they have now increased oxygen affinity, and we call this property is the cooperative binding. So in this binding of the oxygen to the hemoglobin, they shows this kind of affinity, that is cooperative binding affinity. Moving to the next question, the hormone essential for the production of red blood cells is synthesized in option A is bone marrow, option B is spleen, option D, option C is kidney, and option D is liver. Which hormone is essential for the production of the red blood cells? So the right answer for this question is the kidney. This hormone, which hormone essential for the production of red blood cells. So what is this hormone is? This hormone is the erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is essential for the production of this red blood cells, and it is primarily synthesized by the kidney. Here it synthesizes bone marrow, no, spleen, no, this is a graveyard of RBC. Kidney is the right answer. Liver in the fetal, like in the fetus, liver somewhat it like liver will produce this hormone, but in case of adults, this kidney is the right answer. So it is primarily synthesized by this kidney in response to the low oxygen level. Whenever this low oxygen level will detect in the blood, and we call this low oxygen is the hypoxia. Hypo means less, oxia means oxygen. So less oxygen when it will detect, then this kidney start producing this erythropoietin hormone, and erythropoietin, which is very essential for the red blood cells, and it is synthesized in the kidneys. So how this it will work, when the oxygen level drop inside the body, the kidney releases this hormone into the bloodstreams, and this erythropoietin then stimulate the bone marrow, then they'll produce this RBC, and we call the erythropoiesis erythropoiesis process, that is formation of RBCs. And when the increased RBCs is there, then it will enhance the oxygen transport, because we know that inside the RBC, hemoglobin hemoglobin is there, in which 4 heme it will bind to the 4 oxygen. When there is a more RBCs, more hemoglobin is there, and there it will enhance the oxygen transport, and further it will restore the normal oxygen level. Here we can see that hemopoiesis of erythrocyte begin in the hemopoietic bone marrow, that is bone marrow. This is the then this stem cell erythroblast and reticulocytes are there. These reticulocytes are released into the bloodstream, where these reticulocytes then mature into the erythrocytes. And erythrocytes have a 120 days cycles. It circulates around 120 days. After that, these old and damaged erythrocytes, like this is for the advanced information, old and damaged erythrocytes are phagocyted by the macrophages in the bone marrow, liver, and spleen. Here, the globin portion of this hemoglobin is metabolized into the amino acids, and we know that this is the hemoglobin structures, and the 4 heme is there, and this 4 heme will bind with the oxygen, and it will carry the oxygen group. This heme and this iron. This heme portion is break down into the biliverdin for transport into the blood, and iron. So in heme and globin, so in this also, this heme is break down further into the biliverdin that will go to the liver part, and this iron bind to the blood proteins transferring for the transport, so that it will help in the hemopoiesis process. This unused heme group again recycled and used in the hemopoiesis process, so that it can convert the bilirubin and the ferritin fats for storage in the liver. Moving to the next question, the buildup of plaque in arteriosclerosis occurs in option A is inner lining of vein, option B is inner lining of an artery, option C is outer lining of an artery, and option D is middle lining of an artery. Okay, so this is the normal artery, and the right answer for this question is inner lining of an artery. This plaque build up in this disease, that is arteriosclerosis disorder. It is in the inner lining of an artery. So this is the normal artery where no deposit is there, but here we can see that some deposits are there. That is the plaque buildup is there, and here we can see that these plaque formation is inside the artery, that is inner lining of an artery. First of all, that what is this disease? Atherosclerosis. It is a condition in which this plaque, and what is this plaque made up of? It is made up of fat, cholesterol, calcium, and other substances build up inside the arteries, and it will leads to the narrow and very hardening of this blood vessel. If this much plaque formation is there, then it will restrict the blood flow, right? Here no blood flow will be there, then there will be, which will increase the risk of heart attack or heart stroke, and the person may die. So this plaque build up normally in the this endothelium layer of an artery, that is the inner lining of an artery, which causes this damage and the inflammation. And over time this buildup can reduce also, it depends. And also like people like doctor recommend that cases if it will um, someone come like suddenly heart attack, then they can take this aspirin, which will normally dissolve any kind of this cholesterol like substance. So with time also, without any medicine, it can reduce or completely block also. If it will completely block, it will leads to the serious cardiovascular problems. So how it will happen, how the development of this atherosclerosis happen, if we know that this endothelium is the layer, inner lining of an artery, this will start dysfunctioning. Dysfunctional endothelium, they express some adhesion molecule, that is selectins, which mediate the rolling interactions of cells. This is the endothelial cells, and here we can see that this is the selectin molecules. These, the key molecule VCAM1, that is vascular cell adhesion molecule 1, then they will promote the monocytes adhesion, that is precursor for macrophages. These adhering cells are stimulated by the monocytes chemoattractant, that is MCP1, and further this monocyte grows this endothelial cells and settle down in the intima. So it will start then depositing the materials, and this cells will come and they'll start attaching here. Moving to the next question, the normal pressure in the arteries when the heart rests between the beats. Rest means rest. Um, Option A is diastolic and 80 mmHg. Option B is systolic and 120 mmHg. Option C is systolic and 130 mmHg. And option D is diastolic and 130 mmHg. So normal pressure in the arteries when the heart rests between the beats. So the right answer for this question is diastolic and 80 mmHg. Rest means diastolic. And when there is a contraction, we call it as systolic. When systolic is 120 mmHg and diastolic is 80 mmHg pressure is there. So we know that the blood pressure is measured in two values. One is systolic pressure, another one is diastolic pressure. The systolic pressure, the pressure in the arteries when the heart contracts and pumps the blood. We call it as systolic pressure. And diastolic pressure, the pressure in the arteries when the heart rests between the beats. When this heart rests between the beats, we call it as the diastolic pressure. The normal blood pressure is around 120 to 80 mmHg, where 120 represents the systolic pressure when the heart contracts and 80 mmHg represents the diastolic pressure when the heart relaxes. What other differences are there between the systolic and diastolic is the systolic pressure is the maximum arterial pressure during the contraction of left ventricle of the heart, and the normal range is 90 to 120 mmHg in adults, and the normal is like 120 mmHg. Maximum blood pressure, not 90 to 120, 120 mmHg. Maximum blood pressure is present inside the arteries, and it occurs when the left ventricle is contracted. So the when this left ventricle is contracted, then there is a generation of the blood pressure inside the arteries, and whatever the blood pressure generates inside this artery when this left ventricle is contracted, that is 120 mmHg, and it will occurs in the systolic stage of the cardiac cycle and undergo the considerable fluctuations, and this systolic pressure is it normally it increases with the age, and the diastolic, whereas it is refers to the minimum arterial pressure during the relaxation of this left ventricle of the heart, and the normal range is 80 mmHg in adults, and the minimum blood pressure that is present inside the arteries, and it occurs when this left ventricle is relaxed. Opposite to that, when the left ventricle is relaxed, then the minimum blood pressure which is present inside the arteries is the diastolic pressure, and it occurs in the diastolic stage when the heart's under the rest, and normally it decreases with the age. Moving to the next question, the cells that activate cytotoxic T cells to kill infected target cells in adaptive immunity is option A is regulatory T cells, option B is helper T cells, option C is memory T cells, and option D is CD8 positive cells. So the right answer for this is the helper T cells. There are three kind of cells, that is cytotoxic T cells, helper T cells, and the regulatory T cells. So these cytotoxic T cells normally produce a toxic agent to kill their targets. And the helper T cells, it stimulate the B cells to make the antibodies. And it also stimulates the T cells to become active. So that activates the cells that activate cytotoxic T cells to kill the infected targets in the adaptive immunity is the helper T cells, because these helper T cells also stimulates the toxic cells to become active. And the another type of T cell is the regulatory T cells, which suppress the immune responses. So how it will stimulate this T cells? Let's see. So this is the like CD4 or T cells. These CD4 or T cells, helper T cells, whenever there is an antigen, then the antigen presenting APCs are there. These APCs, let's say, they engulf these foreign materials or bacteria, and then they process this antigen and convert into the antigenic peptides, and then they processed to the outside of the cells through the receptors, that is here the MHC2 receptors is there. Through the receptor they are presenting this antigenic peptides. Then the CD4 or the helper T cell recognize these antigen by the interactions. Also another mechanism is they can release the cytokines, and these cytokine will bind to this helper T cells. Like, this is a co-stimulatory things. Once it will happen, then they also release the cytokines, like, so that further they um, interact. In response, the cytokines in the T cells give the signals so that they can clone itself, and they'll start making more T helper cells. Right. Further, these T helper cells, if still antigen is there, they also start producing the B cells, which will produce the antibodies. Also, it will help when another time the antigen encounters, it will recognize the same antigen, and the antibodies which is already present inside the human body, they'll go and attack to the antigen and kill them without any delay. And it will also be easily with the help of this memory cells also, which is also a part of this T cells. Then these clone T cells produce a different cytokines and activate the B cells and these CD cells. So this cytokines only, which is produced by these T helper cells, these will go to the B cells and these will go to the CD positive H cells and activate this. And in the question also they ask that the cytotoxic T cells is activated by which thing when there is an encounter of an antigen? It is stimulated by this T cells. So T cells activates this T helper, or more specifically we called it as T helper cells. It will activates this cytotoxic T cells. And when this cytotoxic T cells activates, here these will release some kind of chemicals, that is perforins and the granzymes, and it will interact with the MHC1 epitope. Normally, these cytotoxic T cells act when there is a virus entry, and it will normally interact with the MHC1 epitope complex, and it will producing this granzyme and perforins, and then what it will do is it will start creating the pores in the plasma membrane, and then all the cell contents will come out and lyse the cells, and there is a lysis of the cells, and it will break down the proteins, enters the cells and break down all the proteins and lyse these cells. In this way it will perform this kind of like action when there is an encounter with an antigen. Moving to the next question, the myelin sheath of the neuron that rotates around the axon for insulation is: option A is Schwann cell, option B is astrocytes, option C is microglia, and option D is none of the above. So let's see the right answer for this question. The Schwann cell is the right answer. So the myelin sheath of the neuron that rotates around the axon for insulation is this Schwann cell. So what is this myelin sheath? This myelin sheath is a fatty layers that wrap around the axon of a neuron. So this is the myelin sheath which is covering the axon of the neuron, and it will provide the insulation. So they're insulating material that there is a no leakage of any currents, right? And it will allow the electric impulse to travel the faster. So in the PNS, that is peripheral nervous system, these Schwann cells are responsible for forming this myelin sheath. These Schwann cells wrap around the axon multiple times, and it will create a layer of myelin that speed up the nerve signal transmission. So here we can see that this is a cell body and it is a nucleus, and this is the dendrites which take the signals from the presynaptic neuron, and the presynaptic neurons secretes the neurotransmitter through the dendrites through the like post like last part of the axon, that is here synaptic knob, right? So through the postsynaptic knob, that is synaptic knob, it will release the transmitters. These neurotransmitter will come and bind with the dendrites, and then it will send the signals to the neuron. Here this is the nucleus and cell body, and this one is the main part, axon. And this Schwann cell, we can see that it will form the myelin sheath, which provide the insulation to the neuron. This is the thick sheath that is called the myelin sheath. And also the some space is there because also the conduction of signal will be there, right? For that this space is there, we call the node of Ranvier. So here jumping of this nerve electric impulse is there, and it will ensure that the signal will be faster, more faster. So the right answer is this Schwann cell, and it will produce the myelin sheath, which is important for the insulation process. Astrocytes is a normally like it's a nourishment. It will provide the nourishment to the cells, to the neurons. So it's a kind of nourishment cells. Astrocytes, microglia. Also, it's a part of this. It's a resident cells of the brain. It is normally present in the brain, and it will regulate the brain development. Also, maintain the neural network, and also injury repair times it will present. So the right answer is the Schwann cell. It is provided this myelin sheath, and which will helpful for the insulation process so that it can speed up this nerve signal transmission. Moving to the next question, the homotimerized protein of the sarcomeric Z line that anchors the end of F-actin filament is option A is dystrophin, option B is beta-actin, option C is tropomyosin, and option D is actin. So the right answer for this question is dystrophin. So what is this dystrophin is? It is a crucial structure protein present in the muscle cells, and it play a very essential role in maintaining the integrity and function of these muscle fibers. It normally involves in anchoring the end of this F-actin filaments at the Z line of the sarcomere. And what is the Z line? It is the basic contractile unit of the striated muscle cells. And what is the function of this dystrophin? It anchors the actin filament. This dystrophin helps link the F actin to the extracellular matrix by the DGC complex, that is dystrophin glycoprotein complex, which will provide the structural stability. Also, it will maintain the muscle integrity. It will protect the muscle fibers from damage during the contraction and relaxation. And the third function of this dystrophin is it stabilizes the sarcomere. By anchoring the actin filaments at the Z line, this dystrophin ensures that there is a proper alignment of the sarcomere, and which is very crucial for the effective muscle contraction. And the last function is that they prevent the muscle degeneration. We know that if there is a mutation in the dystrophin gene, it will create this Duchenne muscular dystrophy and this BMD, that is Becher muscular dystrophy disease, and it will leads to the progressive muscle weakness. Here we can see the structure. So moving to the next question, the regeneration of the skeletal muscle tissue is due to the remaining stem cells of the primates. Option A is collagen and fibrin, like how this regeneration of the spatial skeletal muscle tissue due to the remaining stem cells, which option A is collagen and fibrin, option B is actin and myosin, option C is actin and tropomyosin, and option D is none of the above. So the right answer for this is the actin and myosin. The regeneration of the skeletal muscle tissue. Let's see that how the regeneration of the skeletal muscle tissue and what is the role of this actin and myosin. How this help in the regeneration of the skeletal muscle tissue. We know that the skeletal muscle tissue has a very limited ability to regenerate after any injury, and this limited ability is due to the activation of the muscle stem cells, and also we call it the satellite cells. And the second thing here, we can see that there is a no option as such as satellite cells. And the other, the regeneration ability is due to the structural proteins present, that is actin and myosin. Due to the activation of this muscle stem cells, satellite cells, and the structural protein actin and myosin, which is essential for the muscle repair and the contraction. Why this actin and myosin are important in the muscle regeneration? Because these two are the very key contractile proteins. Actin, that is thin filament, and myosin, that is a thick filament. Here actin and this one is the myosin. So this actin, thin filament, and myosin, which is a thick filament, these are the primary protein responsible for the muscle contraction, and it will play a very important role in muscle fiber repair and rebuilding. Also, after the damage is there, these satellite cells are activated and they fuse these damaged muscle fibers and form the new myofibrils, which is composed of the what, that is actin and myosin filaments. Third, also the sarcomere formation is due to this actin and myosin only. And the Fourth function, that is store strength restoration. When there is a proper alignment of the actin and myosin filament, it will ensure that the regenerated muscle fibers regain their ability to contract and generate the forces. So that's why the right answer is the actin and myosin. That moving to the next question, the type of contractions that occur during the lowering phase of the bicep curl is. Option A is biometric contraction, option B is isometric contraction, option C is isotonic contraction, option D is eccentric contraction. Okay, let's see the answer. So the right answer is the eccentric contraction. Here there are three types of contraction we can see. One is concentric, one is eccentric, and one is isometric. Isometric, as the name suggests, no movement at all. So how we'll divide is there are two kind of contraction. One is isotonic and another one is isometric, in which no movement is there. And this isotonic contraction further divided into the concentric and the eccentric. Now in the question they ask the lowering phase, that is downward phase of the exercise, right? So this downward phase is normally true because of the eccentric contraction. Here in the diagram also we can see that when there is a lowering phase of this bicep curl, and this is the upper phase of the bicep curl, this is the concentric contraction and this one is the eccentric contraction. And when there is a no movement at all, this we called it the isometric contraction. So two types of contraction. One is isotonic, in which this concentric and eccentric contraction is there, and another one is the isometric contraction is there. What is this concentric contraction in the bicep brachii during the upward phase of exercise? This concentric contraction is there, and here the bicep brachii produces tension and it will shorten. It pulls the forearm upwards to cause the flexion of the elbow. So this type of contraction we called as concentric contraction. Eccentric contraction, in which the biceps brachii during the downward phase of exercise. So lowering phase of the exercise is the eccentric contraction. It will produce the tension and lengthen. It- Here we can see that it lengthens the, and here it shortens, and it slows the lowering of the forearm and it controls the extension of this elbow. So that type of contraction we called it as eccentric contraction. And what is this isometric contraction? Occurs in the bicep brachii when the muscle is holding the weight still. There is a no movement at all. When it is holding any weight still, then we called it as isometric contraction. Here the tension is there. Bicep brachii develop the tension, but it stays the same length. It stops the flexion and the extension of the elbow. So there is a no flexion and there is a no extension of the elbow. And we call this kind of contraction is the isometric contraction. So same that when performing a bicep curl, the movement involves two main phases. One is lifting phase and one is lowering phase. This upward movements, that is lifting phase, is the concentric contraction in which the bicep muscle shorten as it generates force to lift the weight. And lowering phase, this is the eccentric contraction in which the bicep muscles lengthen while still generating force to control the descent of the weight. So that's why the right answer is the eccentric contraction. Another that the lowering a dumbbell phase. Other example is descending from a squat position. It will also come under the eccentric contraction. And running downhill or landing from a jump is also under the eccentric contraction. Also, why option D is correct. Also, the in the lowering phase, the biceps slowly lengthen while resist the pull of gravity, and the it the controlled extension of this muscle define an eccentric contraction. So that's all. Moving to the next question, the neurotransmitter upon binding leads to the influx of sodium inside the cells during an action potential in the muscle fiber is. Option A is epinephrine. Option B is norepinephrine. Option C is dopamine. And option D is acetylcholine. Which neurotransmitter, when it will bind, it will leads to the influx of sodium ions inside the cells, and then there will be an action potential generate in the muscle fibers. So here you have to tell the name of the neurotransmitter. Okay, let's see the right answer. So acetylcholine is the right answer. How that this acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter, it will bind and it will leads to the influx of the sodium ion, and then it will generate the action potential in these muscles. How this acetylcholine and how it will help, this nerve signal reaches a muscle, it triggers an action potentials which leads to the muscle contraction, and the responsible is the acetylcholine. So motor neuron releases this neurotransmitter at the neural junction, and then it will bind to the what kind of receptors, these nicotine acetylcholine receptors, and these receptors are present on the muscle cell membrane, and cell membrane we called it as sarcolemma. So on this sarcolemma, these nicotinic acetylcholine receptor is there. These acetylcholine will come and bind to the receptors, and when it binds to the receptor, the sodium channel opens, and these allow the sodium ions to enter the muscle cells. When it enters, then it will depolarize the muscle cells, and it will create an action potential that spread across the sarcolemma, and then further the action potential trigger the release of calcium ion from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and it will leads to the muscle contraction by this actin myosin interaction. Here also we can see that this is action potential at the neuromuscular junction. This is the structure of acetylcholine. Here we can see that in the synaptic knob, synaptic knob have this neurotransmitter. At the end of this postsynaptic neurons, these synaptic vesicles ruptures and release the acetylcholine. These acetylcholine come and bind to the receptor, nicotinic acetylcholic receptors, and after that, the sodium channel opens and depolarize the membrane, and then the calcium channels also open, and it will binds to the myosin and where the troponin parts, and there is an interaction of this actin and myosin filaments, and it will trigger the sarcoplasm contractions. The thick and thin filament interacts, that is actin and myosin, and cause the intersliding, and further they'll do the muscle contraction. So in this way, this muscle contractions happens, and with the help of which neurotransmitter, this is acetylcholine. Moving to the next question, the muscle tissue which shows cross-linked stripes. Option A skeletal muscle, option B smooth muscle, option C is cardiac muscle, and option D is none of the above. So let's see. The right answer is the cardiac muscle, which shows the cross-linked strips. Here we can see that this is the skeleton. This is the skeletal muscle. This one is the smooth, and this one is the cardiac muscles, which shows this cross-linked strip is the cardiac muscles. Let's see what is the difference between the skeletal muscles, cardiac muscle, and the smooth muscles. The skeletal muscle is striated, cardiac muscle is also striated, and smooth is non-striated. Here, skeletal is non-syncytium, and this is a syncytium, that is more than one nucleus is present, and this one is also syncytial. In case of skeletal muscle, small T tubules is there, and in this large and smooth is the rudimentary T tubules is there. And the next point is the sarcoplasmic reticulum is well developed in case of the skeletal muscles, and this calcium pump act very rapidly. But in case of cardiac muscles, it this sarcoplasmic reticulum presence and calcium pump act rapidly. But in case of smooth muscle, it's the in the rudimentary form and it act very slowly. Here they have a very many receptor present in case of skeletal muscles, but in case of cardiac muscles, variety of receptors are there. Example alpha and beta adrenergic. It also have a variety of receptors. But in case of skeletal muscles, not much hormone receptors is present. They lack. Nerve impulse initiate the contraction. Here they have the intrinsic rhythmicity. Cardiac muscles they don't have this nerve impulse which control this contraction. They have an intrinsic kind of rhythmicity. Here also it is initiated by the nerve impulse in case of smooth muscles. Extracellular fluid calcium is not important for the contraction in case of skeletal muscles, but calcium is very important for contraction in cardiac muscles and here also in the smooth muscles. Troponin system is present in both the skeletal muscles and the cardiac muscles, but in case of smooth muscles, they don't have this troponin system and they use the regulatory head of myosin. Kaldesman was not involved in case of skeletal and cardiac muscles, but involved in the smooth muscles. And the last one is the very rapid cycling of the cross bridges is present in skeletal muscles, but relatively rapid cycling of the cross bridges is present in the cardiac, but slow in case of smooth muscles. Moving to the last question, the degenerative disorder of the central nervous system that affect the muscular system and movement is. So, which is the degenerative disorder of the CNS, that is central nervous system, that affect the muscular system and as well as the muscle movements. Option A is Parkinson disease. Option B is muscular dystrophy. Option C is myasthenia gravis, and option D is carpal tunnel syndrome. So the right answer is the Parkinson disease. Here we can see that this stop the posture, affect the rigidity, and there is a very um, it affects the muscular system. Hand tremor is there, reduce arm swimming, shuffling in short step gaits, slightly flexed hip and knees, tremor in the legs also. So it is controlled by the central nervous system. So Parkinson disease is a progressive neurodegenerative disorders. It affects the movement and the muscular system. How it happens is, it when there is a loss of this dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. There is a loss of this dopamine producing neurons in the substantia nigra. What is this substantia nigra? It is a region present in the brain which is normally responsible for to control the movements. So when there is a loss of this dopamine neurotransmitter, it's this dopamine help the like smooth and coordinated muscle movement. If there is a loss in the dopamine, it will leads to the movement difficulties. Also, sometimes the exact cause is not known. That time maybe some mutation is there, like that. So, what is the symptom of this Parkinson disease that affect this motor symptoms is tremor. Here we can see that leg tremor is there, hand tremor is there. That is involuntary shaking, often in the heads and also in the legs also. Bradykinesia, that is bradykinesia, that is slowness in the movements. Muscle rigidity also there, stiffness in muscles, which make the movements very difficult. Also the postural instability, that is there is imbalance in the balance and the coordinations. Then this will lead to Parkinson disease, and this disease is by this central nervous system. So the right answer is this Parkinson disease. That's all for the today's class. Thank you.